Thanks for joining us today for our Williamson County Master Gardener Thumbs Up series. And today we're going to be talking about common landscape gardening mistakes. I'm Kay Davidson. I'm a Master Gardener with Williamson County Master Gardeners, and we are a part of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. We're part of that family. So first I want to say about gardening mistakes. We all make them. It doesn't matter how long you've been gardening, you make them. If you're anything like me, you make them over and over again. It's kind of hard to learn the lesson. I hope if you take nothing from this little talk, is that one thing, don't fret over them. Mistakes are made by everybody, and they really are an opportunity to learn more about gardening in general, about plants, about your yard in particular, what works and what doesn't work. Hopefully today we'll talk about some things that will at least save you a bit of money and by not making repeated mistakes. Okay, we're going to talk about top 10. These are the ones I picked. And then we'll talk about each of those kind of individually a little bit. We're going to talk about planting without a plan, making too many changes too fast, failing to adequately prepare the soil, which is really a big one, is really one of the most important things you can do. Too much togetherness or spacing issues, choosing plants that are unsuitable for Central Texas, our location, placing plants in unsuitable locations or planting them there, wrong planting depth, not applying mulch or not applying enough mulch, improper watering techniques, and excessive pesticide use. The first thing is planting without a plan. You know, when spring comes and you go to the garden centers and you see all those beautiful plants, you just want to buy them all and bring them home, but you don't really know exactly what you're going to do with them or where you're going to put them. This is where the money comes in. If you don't have a plan already, you can waste a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of muscle putting plants willy-nilly in your garden. If you're starting from scratch and you need to create beds, the lady here with the spray can is using a marking can to mark off what she thinks might be a good location and style and shape of a new bed or an extension of a bed. You do not have to have a professional landscape person do this for you. If you can do that, that's great, but you can also play around with it yourself. We're pretty good with knowing what looks good in our yard, I think. The second thing is tree. Don't plant a tree in an area that you are later going to damage severely by maybe putting in a sidewalk or a driveway or some kind of hardscape, a patio of some kind. The tree roots are much more shallow than people think. And when you create hardscape on top of that, you damage a lot of those roots. And you can literally lose a tree doing that. Even a big, beautiful tree that may have been around for, 20 years, you can still lose it. The photo on the left gives you the critical root zone. It's a picture of the root zone and what you can do in each of those realms, I'll say. That from 5 feet out, you really just need to not do anything. You also need to be sure you don't have mulch right up against the trunk. So if you're going to put mulch around your tree, be sure it's at least a foot away from the trunk, because that can cause disease. In that 10-foot zone out, which is kind of like the drip line of the tree, so to speak, you can put some stuff in that area, but you have to be sure that you don't put anything more than a 4-inch pot. You don't want to go down any more than 4 inches. Those are pretty small pots, and you want to be sure that if you are digging and you hit a root that you back off and not use that. In that larger zone, that 20-foot zone, you want to be sure that you preserve 50% of it, meaning you don't plant total, that you leave 50% of it to the way it is, because roots breathe. They breathe just like you and I do, and they must have that area to breathe without being covered with something. If you're planting a new tree, be sure that you plant it further away from the house than most people do. 10 to 20 feet is the suggestion, and of course that will depend on the size of the tree. Always look at the size that the tree will be at maturity and plan accordingly. If you're going to put down hardscape, you know, like sidewalks or patios or, you know, rock beds for your planting areas, anything that's hard, draw those before you start planting. Even if you don't put in the hardscape, draw them, know exactly where they are going to be so that you don't have to disrupt any existing plants that you put in when you do decide to finish that hardscape. When you're planting, be sure that you plant in odd numbers, 1 large specimen or 3, 5, or 7. Those are much more pleasing to the eye than even numbers. You'll have to kind of decide what your desire is in the long run. Okay, what is your style of gardening? You'll see on that top left photo is very formal. Lots of trimming to be done. It's really nice lines, but a lot of work. Below that, you'll see something that's much more contemporary. Straight lines, but not a whole lot of planting, more hardscape stuff. Although very interesting, the concrete bowls that the plants are in are interesting, the concrete squares are interesting. It's, again, just your preference. The photo on the top right is actually a photo of a house in Georgetown that was on Central Texas Gardener. This is kind of my style, very casual, sometimes a little too casual, not a whole lot of rhyme or reason there, but it's beautiful. You have lots of color, you have a lot of different heights, and a lot of interest because, you know, the plants are not the same. You kind of go from one plant to the other and learn new things, bring new butterflies and other pollinators into the yard. The photo below on the far right is more of a xeriscape. It is more harsh. That's not a negative word, but it is more harsh. It tends to be less flowering. Those plants are more drought tolerant, so you don't have to expend as much water on them. Again, very beautiful. You just need to decide which one works best for you. Too many changes too quick. This is a biggie. You know, it's that going to the box store to buy all those beautiful plants and not having a clue what you're going to do with them. If you're new and you're just starting a garden or you're revamping it, please resist just doing something. It is better to wait than it is to just put stuff in without a plan. Be realistic. If you're working full time and you don't have a lot of hours to put into a garden, don't make it extravagant. Make it less extravagant so that you'll have time to actually take care of it, unless you're lucky enough to have somebody do it for you. Live with your yard for a bit. Know where the sunny spots are. Know where the sun is at various times of the day. Know where the shady spots are. Where does the water flow when it rains really heavy? Certainly don't want to plant something there unless it's like a rain garden that, you know, is going to be almost washed away when the heavy rains come. Know where the water pools and doesn't drain well. You certainly don't want to plant anything in an area that's not well drained because no plants like wet feet. That is something you could either avoid or you could actually fix that area before you start to plant. Failing to adequately prepare the soil. This is really, to me, the most important thing. The soil is where your plant lives. It's where it gets its nutrients. If it is not healthy, your plant will not be healthy. So the first thing you need to do is get a soil analysis. And in this slide, you'll see the soiltesting.tamu.edu. You can also just look up, you can just Google soil testing, A&M soil testing, and it'll get you to this link. You want to be sure what is in your soil. You want to be sure about the health of the soil before you start putting things in. So get your soil analysis done. It's not very expensive, and you can, do minimal testing, or you can go all out. A&M will send you back a analysis of your soil and let you know what you do need to put in, or maybe what you do need to hold back on. Soil amendments are the things that you want to put in before you start planting. You want to incorporate them a little bit into the existing soil. Natural soil amendments: grass clippings, compost, finely chopped leaves, aged manure, worm castings, peat moss, expanded shale. Those are just examples. Compost is just, to me, the most important. It's wonderful. Benefits of adding amendments: it improves the soil aggregates. What are soil aggregates? Soil aggregates are the components of the soil that literally make the soil up. Clay, silt, sand, those are your aggregates. Adding amendments to your existing soil increases the porosity, or how porous or permeable the sand is. That means the water can go in and out better. It improves the aeration. The aeration is, the air going in and out. And all your plants' roots need air to live. So being able to have an aerated soil is really important. It increases drainage. Again, no plants like wet feet. It also increases the rooting depth. If your soil is porous and looser, the roots can actually reach further into the ground. And the deeper the roots are, the more healthy your plants are going to be. And they're going to be a little more drought tolerant. Increases the living organisms in your soil. Some of us think that soil is dirt, but it's not. Dirt is kind of muddy, I don't know what, but it's not a living organism. Soil is living. It has thousands and thousands of fungus and bacteria, and all kinds of microbes in there that make it healthy. And adding amendments will certainly help to increase those organisms. These organisms improve entry and storage and water into that soil that you're creating. It helps to resist erosion, which is the soil going away. It also helps the plant nutrition, because it helps the breakdown of the compost and the other things that you put in the soil that are nutrients for the plant. Something has to break that down for the plant to use it, and these microbes do that. The next one is too much togetherness, spacing issues. Trees and shrubs may look okay when you first plant them. You think, oh, those are so pretty. But if you plant them too close together, when they grow to maturity, they crowd each other out, and they compete for water, air, sunshine, and you can start to have problems with your trees. And this is not only for trees, but this is also for bushes. If you plant bushes too close together and they don't have adequate air circulation, they can have fungal issues down the road. Consider putting in smaller trees rather than larger trees. If you have a large yard, that's great. Put in large stuff. If you have a small yard, consider more small ornamental trees. They actually make the yard look more pleasing, and they don't overpower the yard. Too much togetherness, spacing issues again. Know what the mature size of this plant is before you plant it. Don't guess. And you have a really small plant, and they're real tiny, maybe in a 2-inch pot, and you think, oh, I'm going to put these all together. Well, if you've read the label and you see that plant is going to get 3 foot wide, then if you're planting them close together, then they're going to be all bunched up, and they really will look a mess ultimately. So read the label and see, and I think the next slide has that. Hold on. Well, a slide up and I'll show you. Too much togetherness. It's always better to put fewer plants than too many. It may look sparse for a while, maybe the first couple of years, but trust me, it'll prevent you from going in and having to dig stuff out later. Always put the taller plants in front of the shorter plants, of course. There is a saying, which really holds true, that the first year a plant sleeps, meaning that is the time that it's putting down roots, it's putting down its base, so you're not going to see a lot of foliage growth. The second year it creeps, you're going to see a little foliage growing. It's going to get a little bigger. And then the third year is when you'll see it kind of bolt and really start growing to its mature size. So sleep, creep, and leap. Choosing the plants that are suitable for our area. So often we move to Texas from other places in the country, and we have particular plants that we really loved where we came from, but sometimes they just will not work here. We have a very alkaline soil, and that prohibits us from growing some things, particularly azaleas. Although there are some varieties of azaleas that I understand now are more amenable to the alkaline soil. So, do some research and see. We are also in zone 8B. That means that you need to get plants that'll survive 15 to 20 degrees. I know that last year was a fluke, and this, of course, did not apply because our temperatures got a lot colder than that. So these are just guidelines. You never know what nature's going to give you. Don't waste a lot of your money on plants that just are not suitable to this area. Always look for native and adaptive plants. Native plants are the plants that were here, and adaptive are plants that have been brought in, that have grown accustomed and acclimated to our weather and our soils. Here's my plant tag. Pay attention to, when you buy a plant, pay attention to this plant tag on the right. It will tell you lots. It'll tell you when the plant blooms. It'll tell you if it needs sun, part sun, shade. It'll tell you, be careful with putting it in a wet spot. It needs well-drained soil. It'll tell you how high the plant will be, how tall it will grow, and how far to space it apart, and the plant zones that it will be hardy to. If it says full sun, that means about 6 or 8 hours a day. So that's a lot of sun. So be sure that you buy plants accordingly, and don't put, a full sun plant under a big tree or something that's really shady, because ultimately it will not thrive. Placing plants in unsuitable locations. Most plants are described as needing full sun, will do just fine out in the open all day long. So, in the middle of your yard. Make sure that all your plants in a particular bed share the same sun, soil, and water requirements. This photo at the top is a good example of that. This person has planted all succulents in this bed, which means most of the time, most succulents require the same environment, same amount of light, basically the same amount of sun, and the same amount of water. So they can take care of that without having considerations for each of those plants needing different things. This is something I put in there because I just had to deal with this. I had my house painted, and I had a couple of bushes that were kind of overgrown, and they needed to be cut back because the painter couldn't get to the house to paint. So it made me think, I need to talk about putting appropriate size plants under windows and near the house. If you're trying to clean a window and you've got an 8-foot bush in front of the window, it's kind of hard to do that. And it's certainly hard to have any work done on the house. So really look at that, and maybe instead of planting right under a window, plant off to the side of that window so you can get to the window. You could get out of the house if you needed to. You can do your cleaning, whatever. Planting plants in unsuitable locations. The photo at the top gives you a great example of a great location. This person has a shady spot, obviously under a large tree, and they chose plants that will thrive in that area. Some hostas, some ferns, ponyfoot, it looks like. Those are all plants that are going to do okay in that much shade. On the bottom, you're going to see someone that's trying to grow grass in the shade. We get this question a lot at the help desk. Why isn't my grass growing? And they send you pictures and it's not growing because it has too much shade. Shade tolerance is just not something that grass has. There are a few varieties that will tolerate shade more than others, but in general, all grass has got to have sun. Wrong planting depth. The photo on the left is a image of a tree, a small tree being planted. You'll see where her hand is. That is where the roots come off the trunk. That's called the root flare, right in here. You want to be sure that that is planted above ground, not a lot above ground, but somewhat above ground. Plants, all plants, bushes, everything will settle. And if you plant that below ground or even right at ground level, and that plant settles and goes down into the soil, then you're going to cover that root flare and you have a greater chance of that plant not surviving because it's not able to breathe. So you can also Google how to plant a tree. There's some excellent information on our website, the Williamson County Master Gardener website. Planting bulbs at the right depth. This is a biggie because I have friends ask me, I spent all this money on bulbs and I planted them and none of them came up. Probably because you didn't plant them at the right depth. Every bulb that you buy is going to tell you how deep to plant that. If you plant them too deep, they get kind of crowded and they can actually smother and rot. If you plant them too shallow, they're more exposed to the extreme weather and they may not make it because of that. So read those labels, follow the guidelines. When you buy a plant, always examine the roots. You'll see this tree on that top photo. The tree on the left has got really good roots. They're going out in all directions. They're healthy looking. The tree on the right has been taken out of the pot. You can see that those roots are kind of circling around. This is called the circle of death. These roots will never unwrap and never unfurl on their own. You can trim them before you put it in the ground, but sometimes that's difficult as well, depending on how large the plant is. Be sure that you pull your plant out of that pot and you examine the roots. If it were me and I saw that it was encircling roots, I would move on to another plant. Be sure that the roots are healthy, that they're white or tan, and long enough to hold the soil. If you pull a plant out and there's no roots in it and the soil just comes apart, then that's not a well-rooted plant to transplant. So be careful about that. The plant on the bottom slide, the pot on the left is a special pot that is used by growers that literally prevents that circling of the roots. Those are great pots. Look for those if you can find them. If you pull the plant out and the plant is brownish or grayish, the roots are, don't buy it. Move on. Buy something else. Not applying mulch. This is so important. 3 to 4 inches of mulch should be applied in the spring and winter. If you can afford it, if not, just do it once a year. Mulches can get quite pricey. How does it help? It helps to moderate the soil in the root zone, so it helps the roots stay warm in the winter and cooler in the summer. It encourages water retention, which is important. It helps weed control. If there's 3 to 4 inches of mulch down, the weeds aren't as able to come up and sprout. It encourages microorganisms. We talked about that. As this mulch breaks down, it becomes food for those microorganisms and they multiply. And it also, of course, in doing so, adds nutrients for the plants in the soil. If you can, try to use shredded mulch as opposed to the bark mulch, the chunks. They don't break down as easily. Improper watering techniques. Oh, so many people do this. You know, they think that if the rules are to water twice a week, that's what you have to do. That's not necessarily true. The proper way to water is infrequently, but as deep as possible. Meaning, you know, if you're lucky enough to have 5 or 6 inches of soil, it's better to water that once a week and get it all the way down 6 inches than it is to water twice a week and only get it down 1.5 inches. Cycle, we're going to talk about cycle and soaking, but you can also, to know exactly how much water to put down, you can do a catch can test. You can go online to irrigation.tamu.edu. You can take a photo of the slide, and it will show you how to measure how many minutes it takes in each zone to get down 1 inch of water, which is typically the amount of water that we suggest per week for a lawn. You can do this with tuna cans. You can buy these more fancy plastic things at A&M. I don't know other places, but anyway, learn how to do the catch can method. Google that. It's really an important element into conserving water. The soak and cycle water method is the method that needs to be used when you water your yard. It refers to the fact that the water's not applied at a rate faster than the soil can soak it up. And this reduces runoff and waste and is really what needs to be done for our environment. It's a method by which the water is applied in short cycles. So water your yard in 3 to 4 quick cycles, however many minutes, for a total amount of minutes that will put down 1 inch. So let's say you've done that catch can method, and it shows you if you leave your sprinkler on for 5 minutes, you're going to get no runoff, number one. That's the main thing you're looking for. And in that can, you're going to have 1/2 inch of water. So then maybe you'd want to water for 5 minutes. Do that, do that in all your zones. You have to kind of know how many minutes in each zone. Okay. And then you come back and cycle through your various zones until you get that 1 inch without runoff. So sometimes it takes two or 3 cycles. Sometimes it takes, 4. It just kind of depends on the depth of your soil. And if you're lucky enough to have good soil. Be sure that you let your soil dry out between waterings. That's for your grass and also your ornamentals. Because as I said, they don't like wet feet and they need to breathe. And in order to breathe, they need to be allowed to dry out between your waterings. Excessive pesticide use. The first thing that many gardeners do is if they see an insect, they go to their garage and reach for some kind of insecticidal spray. We ask that you not do that. We ask that you instead use what we call integrated pest management. We're going to talk about that. These are methods and approaches that are the least harmful for our ecosystem. These are the components of this management system. The first one is an acceptable level of pest. All pests are not bad, number one. There are many that are good. And secondly, a few are okay. You don't need to have absolute total eradication of every insect in your garden for you to have a nice garden. So the emphasis is on control, not eradication. Preventative cultural practices. If you have healthy plants, that's your first line of defense. Bad bugs tend to come to plants that are not doing well, that are stressed for some reason. So if you have healthy plants, you're going to have less of a problem with the bad bugs. Monitoring. Walk your yard often. Walk it every day. See what insects are out there. You can simply use mechanical controls. If you see you're out there walking and you see a couple of, hand pick them, Okay. You can also use barriers. Behind me, you'll see a yellow thing in a pot. I can't point to it anyway. It's a little tag. It looks like a little yellow butterfly. And it's there because I have an issue with fungus gnats on that plant. So I put an actual trap, which is a sticky trap. So when they fly around, they're going to stay stuck to that trap, and then I'm going to dispose of them. You can also, if you're outside, you can also just use a heavy water spray and spray a lot of those bugs, the bad bugs, off. There are biological controls like ladybugs. They come, I don't know how they know that you have bed bugs, but they do. Nature's amazing. And they come and they eat your bad stuff. Use a reasonable amount of pesticides. Sometimes you have to do it. The infestation is bad and you've got to get rid of them. You can use naturals or you can use synthetics, but always follow the label. This applies to fungicides, miticides, herbicides, any kind of thing you're applying to your yard. Always follow the directions, and more is not better. Excessive pesticide uses kills our good bees and our pollinators. We could not do without them. They are what really maintain our agriculture community. And that's why we have fruits and vegetables in our stores, is because we have pollinators. There are certain things you can use that are less toxic than some of the really hard pesticides. They're neem oil, insecticidal soaps. They are still toxic to the plants that to the insects that they come in contact with, because they work in ways where they smother them, or they can't breathe. But it doesn't leave a toxic substance behind. Be sure that you're applying these in late afternoon or early evening, because that's when especially the butterflies and the bees will be less active, so you'll damage less of them. Oils should not be applied over 85 degrees because it can actually burn the leaves. Always be good to our waterways and our environment. We need to keep it strong. This is a tip. This is not number 11. This is just my please do this. Please stop topping crepe myrtles. It permanently destroys their natural balance and beauty. It weakens their immune response. And the branches that develop these here on that picture on the right, they're really thin and they're more brittle and much more prone to breakage. There's no reason to do this. I don't know why it started, but I think people do it because they planted the wrong size tree in the wrong spot. They planted a 20-foot crepe myrtle in a spot that maybe they should have planted a crepe myrtle whose mature growth was, 10 feet. And so in order to maintain the height, they do this. Really, you just need to buy a tree that is appropriate size for that location. You can, if you come across a tree like this and you want to try, from scratch again, you can cut it all the way to the ground. Neil Sperry, a gardening guru up in North Texas, says he's seen very good results by just cutting it to the ground and letting it start all over again. I've not personally done that, so I can't vouch for it, but this fellow knows what he's talking about. So here are some of the sources that I use for the talk. You can take a picture if you would like, and check out some of them yourself. I certainly appreciate you taking the time to stop in and listen, and hope that the information I gave you is helpful. And we look forward to next month's series of Green Thumbs Up. And I believe we might be able to do that in person. If not next month, then September. Thanks for watching. Bye.